But 10. 10 sounds important. 10 is the basis for the decimal system. It's a decade. It's a psychologically satisfying number. The top 10, the 10 most wanted, the 10 best dressed. So having 10 commandments was really a marketing decision. And to me, it's clearly a bullshit list. It's a political document artificially inflated to sell better. I'm going to show you how you could reduce the number of commandments and come up with a list that's a little more workable and logical. We're going to start with the first 3, and I'll use the Roman Catholic version because those are the ones I was taught as a little boy. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not have strange gods before me. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Thou shalt keep holy the Sabbath. Right off the bat, the first 3, pure bullshit. Sabbath day, Lord's name, strange gods. Spooky language. Spooky language. Designed to scare and control primitive people. In no way does superstitious nonsense like this apply to the lives of intelligent, civilized humans in the 21st century. You throw out the first 3 commandments, you're down to 7. Next, honor thy father and mother. Obedience, respect for authority. Just another name for controlling people. The truth is, obedience and respect should not be automatic. They should be earned. They should be based on the parent's performance. Parent's performance. All right? Some parents deserve respect. Most of them don't. Period. You're down to 6. Now, in the interest of logic, something religion is very uncomfortable with, I'm going to jump around the list a little bit. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Stealing and lying. Well, actually, these 2 both prohibit the same kind of behavior. Dishonesty, stealing, and lying. So you don't need 2 of them. Instead, you combine them and you call it thou shalt not be dishonest. And suddenly, you're down to 5. And as long as we're combining, I have 2 others that belong together. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Once again, these 2 prohibit the same kind of behavior. In this case, marital infidelity. The difference is coveting takes place in the mind. And I don't think you should outlaw fantasizing about someone else's wife. Otherwise, what's a guy going to think about when he's waxing his carrot? But marital fidelity is a good idea, so we're going to keep the idea and call this one, thou shalt not be unfaithful. And suddenly, we're down to 4. But when you think about it, honesty and fidelity are really part of the same overall value. So in truth, you could combine the 2 honesty commandments with the 2 fidelity commandments and give them simpler language, positive language instead of negative, and call the whole thing, thou shalt always be honest and faithful. And we're down to 3. Thou shalt, they're going away fast. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. This one is just plain fucking stupid. Coveting your neighbor's goods is what keeps the economy going. Am I right? Your neighbor gets a vibrator that plays "Oh Come All Ye Faithful." You want to get one too. Coveting creates jobs. Leave it alone. You throw out coveting and you're down to 2 now. The big honesty and fidelity commandment, and the one we haven't talked about yet, thou shalt not kill. Murder. The 5th commandment. But when you think about it, religion has never really had a big problem with murder. Not really. More people have been killed in the name of God than for any other reason. All you have to do... Sure. All you have to do is look at Northern Ireland, the Middle East, Kashmir, the Inquisition, the Crusades, and the World Trade Center to see how seriously the religious folks take thou shalt not kill. The more devout they are, the more they see murder as being negotiable. It's negotiable. You know? It depends. It depends on who's doing the killing and who's getting killed. So, with all of this in mind, I leave you with my revised list of the 2 commandments. Thou shalt always be honest and faithful to the provider of thy nookie. And thou shalt try real hard not to kill anyone. Unless, of course, they pray to a different invisible man from the one you pray to. 2 is all you need. Moses could have carried him down the hill in his fucking pocket. And if they had a list like that, I wouldn't mind those folks in Alabama putting it up on the courthouse wall. As long as they included one additional commandment, thou shalt keep thy religion to thyself. Catholics, which I was until I reached the age of reason. Catholics and other Christians are against abortions, and they're against homosexuals. Well, who has less abortions than homosexuals? Leave these fucking people alone, for Christ's sakes. Here is an entire class of people guaranteed never to have an abortion. And the Catholics and Christians are just tossing them aside. You'd think they'd make natural allies. Go look for consistency in religion. And speaking to my friends, the Catholics, when John Cardinal O'Connor of New York and some of these other cardinals and bishops have experienced their first pregnancies and their first labor pains and they've raised a couple of children on a minimum wage, then I'll be glad to hear what they have to say about abortion. I'm sure it'll be interesting. Enlightening, too. But in the meantime, what they ought to be doing is telling these priests who took a vow of chastity to keep their hands off the altar boys. Keep your hands to yourself, Father. You know? When Jesus said, suffer the little children come unto me, that's not what he was talking about. So you know what I tell these anti-abortion people? I say, hey, if you think a fetus is more important than a woman, try getting a fetus to wash the shit stains out of your underwear. For no pay and no pension. I tell them, think of an abortion as term limits. That's all it is. Biological term limits. But you know, the longer you listen to this abortion debate, the more you hear this phrase, sanctity of life. You've heard that, sanctity of life. You believe in it? Personally, I think it's a bunch of shit. Well, I mean, life is sacred? Who said so? God? Hey, if you read history, you realize that God is one of the leading causes of death. Has been for thousands of years. Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Christians, all taking turns killing each other because God told them it was a good idea. The sword of God, the blood of the Lamb, vengeance is mine. Millions of dead motherfuckers. Millions of dead motherfuckers, all because they gave the wrong answer to the God question. You believe in God? No. Dead. You believe in God? Yes. You believe in my God? No. Dead. My God has a bigger dick than your God. Thousands of years, and all the best wars, too. The bloodiest, most brutal wars fought, all based on religious hatred, which is fine with me. Hey, anytime a bunch of holy people want to kill each other, I'm a happy guy. But don't be giving me all this shit about the sanctity of life. I mean, even if there were such a thing, I don't think it's something you can blame on God. No, you know where the sanctity of life came from? We made it up. You know why? Because we're alive.
Same with religion. Religion is nothing but mind control. Religion is just trying to control your mind, control your thoughts. So they're going to tell you some things you shouldn't say because they're sins. And besides telling you things you shouldn't say, religion's going to suggest to you some things you ought to be saying. Here's something you ought to say first thing when you wake up in the morning. Here's something you ought to say just before you go to sleep at night. Here's something we always say on the third Wednesday in April after the first full moon in spring at 4 o'clock when the bells ring. Religion is always suggesting things you ought to be saying.
Welcome to XM's Performance Theater. I'm Sonny Fox, and we are honoring this time around an icon, a fellow who has really changed comedy as we know it, literally. He's celebrating 50 years of entertainment this year. He's gone through more changes than most people do in a lifetime, and he's invited us along on those changes. And sort of like the Beatles, we've gone through those changes with him. And he spent 50 years, think about that, 50 years making us laugh, And more importantly, in some people's opinion, he's spent 50 years making us think. Would you welcome, please, Mr. George Carlin?
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
It's your first visit to XM.
Yes, it is. It's okay. This is
Sure. You look pretty good for an old fart.
well. First time I've done makeup for radio. Old fart is
Oh, I forgot. You're not an old fart. You're
an old fuck.
yeah, right. Okay.
I'm an old fuck. Kind of like a fat fuck, tall fuck, skinny fuck, short fuck. You know. That's not old man. Old man is kind of like not an age or a period of your life. Old man is a point of view, you know? It's a way of looking at the world. There are some guys who are old men in their 20s, 30s, you've seen it. You know, they just got old mannish ways. Sometimes you see a little kid with glasses and a double-breasted suit, and he's like a little old man, you know? It's not old man, it's not old fart, which is kind of like... It's old fuck, you know. In this respect, fuck is a synonym for the word fellow.
Well, you look pretty good for an old fellow.
Well, I feel pretty good for a 69-year-old guy. Yep.
You're going to be celebrating 70 next month?
That's right. May. Yep.
Wow. 70 years old. Now, 50 years in show business, when I was doing some research, I thought, how often do you speak to somebody who's worked with Ed Sullivan and Keanu Reeves? That's quite a...
Yeah.
Who's more fun, by the way?
Keanu is really fun on the set with Alex Winter. I was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with the two of them, and then the sequel, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Right.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. They were very strange, but you know, well, they would never calm down until they call for action on a shot. They would clown and kid around and play grab ass and everything right up until the last second, and then it would be like and action, and suddenly they would be in the scene. And it threw me because I was trying to be an actor, you know. I was trying to be serious about what I had to do,
right.
And I'd have to just stand there and kind of like keep my mind on my first line, you know, because I'm not a trained actor. And
We'll talk about your movie career, and we're going to invite
such
people.
as it is.
Yes. Invite people up for questions throughout
Good.
this whole thing.
Good.
But I do want to go back to what started this whole thing.
Right.
You were born in New York.
That started it.
Now,
Is his collar okay?
oh,
His collar straight?
that's great.
I'm kind of fussy about the collar.
Your mother made a rather important decision when you were just a baby to
With my
raise-
dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a drinker, and he was a very successful advertising salesman in newspapers, selling space. And he was an accomplished public speaker, evidence speaker, they called him. And he was a drinker and a bit of a bully. He never did beat her or touch her or anything like that. But he kind of terrorized her and was abusive to my brother. So she didn't want that happening to me. And when I was 2 months old and my brother was 5 years old, she took us out the fire escape window in her father's apartment in New York. I in her arms and my brother ran down the fire escape into the backyard, through the backyards out to Broadway and into my uncle's, Packard. Drove us off to the country, and she never looked back. And she got back into business in advertising and raised 2 boys during the last half of the recession, the Depression, the Great Depression, and the Second World War. So she did quite a job.
Your mom's been quite an influence on you, hasn't she?
Yeah, well, she was the sole parent, of course, and she was absent because she had to work. So I did a lot of parenting to myself. I engaged in a lot of mental activity to kind of fill the void which children will do, and I had radio to listen to. But she was very conscious of language, as was her father. Her father, a New York City policeman, my grandpa, whom I never knew. I never knew any of the grandparents. I never knew my father either. I had the one parent in my experience. And my grandfather was a cop in New York, 20 years, around, way back, because they were all rather old when their kids were born. So as a result, this was in the 1890s. And he wrote out, my grandfather, wrote out many of the works of Shakespeare longhand during his lifetime because of the joy it gave him. That was the explanation he had. Wow. So that's an indication of the language gene at work. And my mother inherited that. The Irish have that to a great degree. Some do, some don't. But it's kind of a generalization, but it's true. It's an Irish trait, language. And gift of gab. My father had it, my mother had it. So it was natural for me to have that, and then she reinforced it. These things have to be reinforced as well. And she reinforced it in me.
Now, your brother, Patrick, was 5 years older than you.
Patrick, yes.
Usually when you have a brother 5 years older, it usually becomes a punching bag. How did he
was too
handle...
busy out getting laid and fighting. He don't want to bother with that. He don't have time for bullying, and it's not in his nature, really. You know what he told me? He said, when you came home from the hospital, and you know about how a young child can react to a new baby in the house. There are kind of certain horror stories you hear about how tough it is for the kid to adjust to that, and sometimes there's hostility. He said, I was so glad when you came home from the hospital. He says, I was so curious about you, and I used to watch you in the crib, and so he has a wonderful, wonderful nature, but he inherited, I think, also my father's temper. So he was more of a fighter than I was. In the neighborhood, he was a physical guy, in the bars and street corners. I wasn't really of that type.
You, in fact, used one of Patrick's jokes last night on stage.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's still alive, of course, up in Woodstock. He said something that I wrote down a long time ago, and I just started saying it recently. He said, what we should do is take all the mentally defective people in this country, give them government jobs, and just sit back and watch things improve. He's a pretty funny guy and very verbal, very, very verbal. More so than I even.
You and him have a sort of the same perspective on things, don't you?
Pat and I? Yeah. We both feel it's... we're both opposed to organized religion. We're both opposed to, the way government has, the way the citizens have organized themselves in this country, which passes for government. I think the republic is a failure. We both, for the most part, think this experiment was nice while it lasted, and we're not too impressed with the human species, because, the record is rather not a good one. And so we inhabit the same area in those kind of philosophical areas, and we talk a lot on the phone a couple of times a week, and we have, you see what we have. I'm 69 years old now. He's 75, and we have common memories. We have common experiences and nomenclature and things in our childhood that I can call him up and mention a brand name that is no longer in existence. Like Ipana toothpaste. I can call up and I can say, Pat, Ipana. And they'll say, yeah, wow, It's so great. We're both we're Irish. There's another generalization. The Irish are very kind of sentimental and like that, and there's a nostalgia that we love. And we're both a bug for those artifacts of our childhood, and it's just nice to have that. So common vocabulary, common background, common memories.
Do you remember, by the way, the spokesperson for Ipana? on television?
I can be reminded. No.
Bucky Beaver.
I didn't know that. I did not know
really?
that. Really?
That's how old
Television?
I
No,
am.
no. We're radio kids.
Right.
I mean, we experienced television when we came home from the street corner, but we didn't hang on the television set after school the way the next generation did. We were radio kids, and then as fast as we could get out of the house, we were street corner guys.
And speaking of street corner, you hung around Morningside Heights.
Morningside Heights.
But you had a different name for it.
Well, they called it Morningside Heights Columbia University because of political reasons of their own. We lived in what we called White Harlem. It was the west side of Harlem. It was technically, in a manner of speaking, the white area of West Harlem. We had Cuban, Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican, great number of Dominicans in Manhattan now, and Black Harlem, of course. So we lived in a kind of a mixed area, especially as you got out from the Irish enclave. We lived in a little, I would call it an Irish enclave. And as you went out from there, actually on LaSalle Street, at one time at LaSalle Street, one half of that street was white and the other half of it was black. And there wasn't a lot of hostility. I mean, there were occasional things, and there were attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I never had that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them. But I know I heard the kids around me. But there was never any open hostility, because when you live in the area between two very different areas, you have to learn to get along. It's a luxury to live in the middle of one of those areas and have all these attitudes and, you know, have a chip on your shoulder. But when you live right where the two of them join, you're forced to sort of live in a third area, which is the mixture. And it's very nice. It's very, it's a good way to start your life.
Well, the people in that area, your childhood certainly impressed you. You shared them with all of us. Father Rivera. Was he really that lenient? You could actually see the line move at confession?
Yeah, Father, we had about 6 priests in the parish. Father Kelly, Father Ford was the pastor, Father Russell, Father Smith, and some of them came and went, and I don't remember their names, Father Daly and Father Halpern and Father Rivera, who was there primarily because there was starting to be more of a Spanish representation. I don't use words like Latino and Hispanic. I say we grew up with Hispanic people, you know. Spanish heritage. Somewhere in their mixed blood there's Spain, so I call them Spanish people. Father Rivera was there to serve them, and to pastor them, or I should say to tend to their pastoral needs. And one of them was confession. And Father Rivera didn't understand. I mean, he understood English, but he didn't sound like he understood it. and we would go to Father Rivera because he was notorious, or that's probably not the right word, he was famously more lenient. And you would get a lighter sentence, a lighter penance in confession.
Sentence.
And you could see people would switch the line, people on Father Kelly's line, when Father Rivera would show up and, you know, they'd kiss the stole and put it on and go in the confessional. You would see people race and rush over to Father Rivera's line. Father Rivera, you know, I said, come here, man. He didn't question it. Some of the priests, you know, they would question, so how did you touch yourself? How did you touch yourself, son? He didn't go into any of that, how I touched myself.
No, you just started.
You know, he didn't want that.
You just started doing a voice. You used to sit around the tape recorder and record these voices.
Well, this was a turning point in my life, and it's one that people should know about. When I was a young boy, I was a mimic, and I could imitate people in the neighborhood, authority figures, teachers, shop owners, other parents, cops on the beat, and people on television. Yeah, I could do little imitations. They were largely imitations of other people doing it. That's how you learn to do Jimmy Cagney. You see another guy do it on stage, and you say, oh, I'm a copycat. It's easier because they point out the highlights of sleep. But neighborhood stuff. I was kind of the class clown in school, and then after school I was kind of like the neighborhood wise guy, one of the neighborhood wise guys on the street corner. And I would gather a little audience because I would put together little routines. I had little parodies that I did I lifted things everyone steals from comedians when they're starting. So I would steal imitations in Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Cagney and Peter Lorre, and I would do fake commercials that I had heard or read in Mad. Well, Mad Comics came along a little bit later. There was another magazine called 1,000 Jokes. And I put together little routines, and they would say, Georgie, hey, Georgie, do that thing about such, and I would stand up and do it, and it would come out differently each time. And I developed this ability to stand up in front of a group of people and get their attention and get their approval. That was important to me, apparently. When I was a little kid, I'd go to my mother's office, and she'd say, imitate Mae West, do the imitations. And I would do the imitations for the ladies in her office, and they would laugh. And I noticed, I don't remember noticing this per se, but I must have noticed that this got me the attention of adults. Because don't forget, I was alone in that house most of the day. When I wasn't in school, I came home and I was alone. I got the attention of these adults, and I got their approval through their laughter. They were more or less saying, good boy, George, good going, way to go. Yes, he's good, he's cute. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever? That's what this job is. So as a youngster, I wanted to be a comedian. I was probably only 8 or 9 or 10 years old when I began to form an idea that I wanted to be in the movies like Danny Kaye and like Red Skelton. And I called that being an actor, but it was actually being a comedian. And pretty soon I found out the word comedian, and I wanted to be a comedian. And when I graduated from 8th grade, the last thing I graduated from, by the way, my mother asked me what I wanted, and one of the brothers at school, Brother Conrad, had told us that he can get a clergyman's discount on cameras. So I asked him if he could get a clergyman's discount on tape recorders. Now, this was 5 years after the Second World War. Tape recorders had come out as consumer items, but they were as big as a small Buick. They were large. They were like this big, and you had to buy them in a showroom up above the street. They weren't on sale in stores. I bought this big Webcor, long story, and I'm keeping it long, that I used it. I used it to do voices and do little sketches and skits and fake radio shows and fake newscasts and commercials. And I used it to more or less train myself for the thing I wanted to do. My mother was very progressive to have bought me that as a graduation present. I mean, she was a far thinker to see that in me and go ahead and foster that and reward that. Even though she didn't want me to follow it, but she knew it was a healthy thing for me to be doing.
You've always been a planner.
Yeah,
you had this optimistic,
Georgie plans, they called it.
Yeah, this optimistic attitude that if you planned it well enough and you meant well, it's going to happen. You believe that?
Well, I would only plan things I felt, that obviously, that I wanted and thought I was qualified for. But this is the good example of this career planning that I did. I said, well, first I'll be. See, I wanted to be an actor. I called it actor because I saw them in the movies and I knew they were movie actors. So Danny Kaye and these guys, I thought actor. Okay, so first I'll be a stand-up comedian. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the only place stand-up comedians worked was nightclubs. Those kind of really more or less sophisticated places where you saw in the movies, and people danced and there was a singer. And there was a comic, and I never got into those places. I was too young, and it wasn't in my world. So I knew about comedians from radio and from television later, but movies when I was a youngster. So I aimed at that, and I thought, well, the way to get there would be to first get into radio. That would be my first move, because then I could practice using my voice and I could learn to speak and do a lot of these things without an audience directly in front of me, which is the usual thing in radio. They're not sitting in the studio. And therefore I wouldn't be as nervous or afraid, and I could kind of build up my confidence, and then I could become a stand-up comedian, because by then there were further venues for comedians. I thought, then I can be a stand-up comedian, and then I can go, then if I'm really good at that, then they have to let me in the movies. And that was the way I looked at it. They had to let me in the movies. And that was the plan, and it became more sophisticated as I went through 13, 14, 15 years and started to actually think of ways to go about it.
Now, you actually revealed your life plan in, what, you're 11 years old?
Yeah, when I was 11, it was 5th grade, Sister Nina, and I saw her, by the way, just about 3 or 4 years ago. She came to a show
really?
Of mine up in Wisconsin. Yeah, she was 81, sharp as can be. sharp, then quick, you know. She said, "Yeah, you lived on the top of the hill." You know, they remembered me for other reasons, but she actually remembered that I lived right up the block from the school. 5th grade, Sister Nine, I used to sing at the club meeting. They had once a week, they'd have a club meeting, and there'd be new business and old business and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd be the entertainment. You could do an imitation, you could bring in your banjo, play the piano, sing a song. I would always stand up and sing a song. I sang Mañana in her class. Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me. And, you know, some of the guys thought it was goofy, and some of them liked it. But in Sister Nina's class, we were assigned to write an autobiography. I think 5th grade is about time to look back on your life. So, part of the autobiography was the last page, and that page was what I'm going to be. And I said, I want to be either an actor, announcer, disc jockey, imitator, I guess I called it, or an actor. Actor, comedian, imitator, announcer, or something like that. So there it was, you know, right in front of everyone. And there was a nice amalgam. You can tell that the thing I wanted most was attention. That was really what that sentence was all about, you know. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever, look at me.
Well, you went into the Army, you got that out of the way.
Air Force, yeah.
Air Force, sorry. And luckily there was a radio station just off base.
Yeah.
It was in Shreveport, right?
Shreveport, Louisiana, which sounds like a kind of a dopey place for this. Actually, it was a very hot radio market. They had 9 radio stations at